Welcome to Bodies Don't Lie, a deep dive into reading body language. Your CLE credit number, reference number for the Florida Bar will be listed at the end of this presentation. You receive 1 professional credit and 2 general credits for today's webinar. You are welcome to stop and pause this video at any time and return to it. Just make sure that you log in to your account so you can view the page. All of our content is password protected, so you won't be able to access that page without logging in. First, we're going to talk about body language basics, about reading and interpreting movements. Now, with this, I like to make sure that everyone is aware you want to keep in mind about how you can utilize body language within your law firm. Regardless of what type of law you practice, you can read and interpret movements for potential jurors, your potential clients, if you have to go to mediation. So there's lots of different ways that you can utilize body language, and keep in mind as well that you won't be able to grasp all of it at once. It is a learned skill set, so it does take time and practice. And I always recommend, to always utilize any time that you have where you are out in public and you're able to assess or review other people and watch them. It's a great time to practice your body language skill set as well. Keep in mind that people build their first impressions of you and you of them based on the following. It's typically within the first few seconds, and 55% of that is on your body language, your body form, posture, and the movements that you make. 38% is going to be on your voice tone and pitch. The volume of your voice and how you are actually coming across with your voice. And then less than 7% is on what you say, what actually comes out of your mouth. I'm sure there have been many times when you have met someone and you made a snap decision, a snap judgment about them, and maybe months later you thought, wow, I really misjudged that. That happens a lot with people. So keep in mind a couple of things when you are reading movements and interpreting them. There's 3 things you always want to keep in mind. Number 1 is going to be the situation and the setting. So for example, is this the situation? Are you in court? Are you at a networking function? Are you within your office? And what circumstances are surrounding this? The person that you're evaluating are they, opposing your case? Are they a potential client? Are they a new hire or someone that you're interviewing to bring on board with your law firm? Because that will factor into how you read their movements. The second thing that you want to take into account is, do you have a relationship with that person? It doesn't have to be a personal relationship. It could be a person that you have done business with before or that you have seen in action before. The more you know someone, the more you're going to know their regular involuntary movements, or what some people would list as a tic, or just something that they do, whether that's rocking in a chair or always crossing their arms. Because if you do have a personal relationship with them, you're going to know all the little idiosyncrasies that they do with their body language. And the last thing I would tell you is to do not constantly examine body language. You can overthink really anything, but especially with body language. So you don't want to second guess yourself when you are evaluating and interpreting movements. Take a moment and just think to yourself, what situations do you find most difficult? Do you find that interviewing is difficult for you in reading and interpreting body language? Is it client interactions, trying to figure out if they are going to come on board with you or hire you to take care of their case? Is it things in the office when you are dealing with coworkers or vendors and so forth? But take a moment and figure out, what situations have you found the most difficult in the past? Now, once you have done that, think about the body language that was involved. What threw you off? Was it something with their arms, with their legs, or with the way that they maybe took a step back or came closer to you? What was it about what they did non-verbally that kind of made you feel like, I don't really know how to read this person? The reason you want to do this is because as you're going through this course is it can kind of help you determine in past situations maybe why someone did something that they did, or maybe something that could have tipped you off or and that you can be aware of in the future. So take a moment and think about that and just jot those ideas down. You are welcome to pause this video if you'd like. The first part of body language that we're going to talk about has to do with facial gestures. You're going to be able to tell a lot from the face. So it's not the most telltale sign of your entire body with body language, but it is probably number two, the second most telling. And it is the one that you will almost always have access to, even if you are doing a remote meeting on Zoom. You will at least be able to see their face, potentially their shoulders as well, and maybe part of their arms or upper torso. So depending upon how they're seated and how far back they are from the camera. So you can definitely tell a lot from the face. With the face, there are two things to think about: positive evaluation and negative evaluation. This all has to do with a person's face. Now, with that being said, you can really tell a lot, for example, with jury selection. If you are in the process of selecting a jury and you're finding as certain details are released and they're hearing this information and you're seeing some of them touch their face, it can kind of give you an idea of how they're feeling about what they just heard. And depending upon what side of the case that you're on, you can read and interpret those movements to see, is this somebody we want on the jury, or is this someone we want to make sure is not on the jury? So you can take a look at that and really evaluate how they're feeling. And positive and negative evaluation is fairly easy to do. Basically, anything from the touching of the face. And I usually like to kind of go on record as well, just to say, I don't think it's a good idea to touch your face, especially in this day and age, just simply because of germs. But people do it involuntarily. It's not just when their nose itches or maybe their eyes are bothering them or their eyes are watering, but they also do it involuntarily based on what they have just heard to kind of help protect themselves from what they heard. They either like it or don't like it. So touching of the face from the eyes above. So directly from the eyes above, not the nose, not the center of the nose, but eyes and above the forehead, their hair right above their forehead, by their eyes, or touching their eyes or their eyeglasses is considered positive. If they're rubbing their eyebrows or brushing their hair away a little bit, maybe they're adjusting their eyeglasses from the side, again, not the center, but the side. That means they like or they agree with what they just heard. So keep that in mind. Eyes above is positive, nose below is negative. And a good way to remember that is negative nose. So basically from the nose down, nose to the chin, is if they touch that, maybe they touch their the side of their face, or they're scratching kind of, they go from the side of their face down to the back and start scratching the back of their head, or they're rubbing their neck from behind and it's still within alignment of being within the chin and the nose. That means frustration, negativity. They don't like what they've heard. They don't agree with it or they don't like it. So again, nose below. Now, if they adjust their eyeglasses from the center, meaning they're touching the middle of their nose, a lot of people will mistake that and think, oh, well, they kind of like what they've heard. No, they're touching their nose. So nose below is always going to be considered negative. Here are a few sample pictures just to give you an idea. Again, this young lady up here in the corner, she has, she's adjusting her eyeglasses. And if I were speaking to her and she did that, that would basically be construed. She likes what I just told her or what she just heard. Now, the two pictures that are below, clearly are more negative. But again, the young lady in the corner here who is touching the middle of her nose, she is touching her nose. Now, she could have a headache. She could be not feeling very well. Sometimes people will do that. But a lot of times if you are talking to someone and they start to do that, maybe they're rubbing the bridge of their nose, that, again, they're not liking what they have heard. This gentleman who has his mouth covered, most people would think, oh, he's probably just relaxing or just kind of, intaking what you're saying. And yes, part of that is true. He is probably absorbing what the other person is saying to him. However, he has covered his mouth. When someone is covering their mouth when you're talking, they either don't believe you or they don't like what you have said or they don't agree with it. So it could be, it's typically a negative reaction out of those three. Even though he looks like he's kind of comfortably relaxing, he is evaluating that, but not on a positive note. So anytime, rule of thumb, again, they're touching their face, nose below, they don't like what you have said. So again, for jury selection, when you're seeing this, if they're saying details about perhaps this is what happened during why we're having this trial, they start to talk about details, or they're asking them questions about how do you feel about, and they fill in the blank, and you start to see this, and maybe you are on you're wanting to make sure that this person goes to jail, and you see those jurors doing that. Clearly they don't like what they've heard. They'll probably make a good juror for your side of the team, not for the other one. So if you are seeing that, they're not liking that, they're not liking what they've heard, they may be able to be swayed a little bit more with your with testimony and so forth. So keep that in mind. Always watch what they're doing with their face. If you are able to see other parts of their body, that's even better. But if you're only really able to see from the neck up, again, if it's on Zoom, or if you can only see from where they're seated above, you can tell more with their arms and their hands as well. But this is specifically to do with the face. Leaving a positive impression, to talk about body language, just a few basic things to keep in mind. And a lot of times people overlook these things, which is not good. You want to make sure that you are always keeping in line of your own, keeping mindful of your own body language as well. You want to make sure that you are using proper eye contact, even on Zoom. You don't have to look directly into the camera. You can look above it, you can look below it. But make sure it gives that appearance that you are looking at them. You want to use good eye contact, even with a handshake. Your handshake needs to be firm, but you need to be looking them in the eye. And I know a lot of people now are not shaking hands. We're going to cover that too. But again, these are just a couple of review things to think about. Obviously, smiling when it's appropriate. People need to feel comfortable with dealing with you, especially if you are networking. Maybe you're in a position with your law firm where you have to go out and get your own clientele. You have to go out and do some networking and schmoozing to bring clients in, or you just started your own firm, so you're responsible for bringing in that caseload. You need to make sure people feel comfortable dealing with you. You want to be obviously the expert in the industry, but you don't want to be so intimidating that people don't feel comfortable talking to you about their problems. So smile when it's appropriate. Sitting with your back straight and shoulders back is a big thing that a lot of people don't do. I see a lot of people slouching when they're on Zoom calls even. Don't think people don't take that into account. They may think that you're disinterested. They could think that you're really not into what they're saying. One thing that you can do is you can buy something called it's a posture belt for your back. It costs about $20. You can buy them on Amazon and you can wear them on underneath your clothes. So if you're sitting for long periods of time, it does help you with your posture, but that's going to help your body language. Again, making sure people understand that you're interested, you're in the conversation, you're hearing everything that they're saying, and you can wear it out in public as well, and it will help your back, so that's always an added benefit. Try to avoid touching your nose and your chin. Again, anywhere where it could be construed as negative, because those are things that you want to look for in people, but keep in mind they're also looking at that. If they've studied or evaluated body language and they see you doing it, it's going to misconstrue where they might think, hey, you're not that interested, or you're not believing me. So try to avoid touching your nose and your chin, even if you feel like you need to rest your hand comfortably in the palm, or your head or face in the palm of your hand. I would recommend not doing that at all cost. Don't cross your legs or arms. A good rule of thumb with the rest of the body, positive and negative evaluation for the rest of the body would be crossed, legs, crossed arms, negative. Open arms, open, not directly open, but where your arms and your legs are not crossed over. You're seated professionally and comfortably, but you don't have your legs crossed. Now, if you're one of those people who that's something you always do, by all means continue to do that. People who know you and know that that's something that you do will kind of dismiss that when they're evaluating body language. But typically, if you are talking with someone or you're saying something to them and they maybe lean back and cross their arms over or they cross their legs over, if it's appropriate and you're in a position where you can do this, clearly stop and say, hey, did that make sense to you? Does all of that, is this clear so far? Get them back into the conversation because you may have said something that made them feel not uncomfortable, but they didn't like it, or they maybe don't agree with it, or they weren't prepared for it. And it's just a good way to take a body language cue to stop the conversation and see where they're at, what they're thinking. And this can happen in a variety of different scenarios. Again, jury selection's one thing, but you can't stop and ask them in jury selection. However, if you are networking or you have a new client that comes into your office and you're talking to them about, maybe you're a divorce attorney and you're telling them, here's all the things I'm going to need from you. And maybe you start talking about, I need a copy of the will, I need a copy of life insurance policies, I'm going to need payroll stubs. And that person kind of just crosses, leans back in their chair and they cross their legs. Stop and say, do you think, are these things that you feel you can get for me? How are you feeling so far? Ask them, because maybe they can't get those things for you. Maybe they feel uncomfortable giving those to you just now. So always ask, bring them back into the conversation. Don't keep going down the list, stop and ask. So crossing of the arms and legs are always going to be construed as negative. It goes back to our human instincts of fight or flight. Typically when someone is in a car wreck, first thing that we all do, and I've been in a car wreck myself, where you take your hands and you just, even though it's not going to do any good, you automatically cover your head, you cover whatever parts, your vital parts of your body. So again, it's just that fight or flight mode that sends a signal to our brain and it triggers through our body, and we immediately cover, we cross our legs, cross our arms to protect us from the verbal words that we just heard or didn't like. Pupil sizes, you have to be pretty close to someone to see this, but pupil size will increase with interest. One thing I will tell you with this is that if you are at a networking function, because you do need to get new clients, and maybe it's an after hours event, it's happy hour, pupil size will increase if someone is drinking. So keep that in mind as well. Positive body language, where somebody is really into what you're saying, it's going to be finger to finger, toe to toe. The body is pointing towards you with toes and feet, shoulder to shoulder. You have their feet are directly pointed at yours. They're engaged in what you are saying. So keep that in mind. If you are talking to someone, they're like that, and then the conversation goes somewhere else, maybe you're talking about politics, I don't know, or something different, and you see their body language actually gravitate a little bit, maybe 90, towards the left or towards the right, they're moving away from you, their body is kind of at an angle. At that point, they've lost interest in what you've just said, or they don't like it. So again, these are just body language cues that you can pick up on. And if you are in a position where you can stop what you're saying and bring them back into the conversation, great. If you're not, because you're in court or because you're doing a closing argument or you're doing jury selection, then clearly you just have to take the cues and just take them for what they're typically worth. Even though most of the time you're not going to know these people, you're not going to know if that's a normal tick for them or something that they usually do. But this will give you an idea of leaving a positive impression, because people, again, when you're talking to them, you want to give the same positive impression back. Interest and anxiety, I always cover this because interest and anxiety are very similar in nature, and a lot of times people cannot tell them apart. So one thing that you really need to think about is, again, the situation and the setting. What is going on? Are you at court? Is it sentencing? Clearly, there's going to be anxiety. Is it a new, maybe you're at mediation and there's an interest in, hey, we need to come to an agreement here. So regardless of what could be going on, think about the situation and the setting and what's going on, because that's going to give you a better idea of whether it's more an interest thing or an anxiety issue. And you really want to make sure that you're spotting this early on, because anxiety can definitely escalate into a situation that could turn negative. It could turn from anxiety to anger, which no one wants to see happen. So keep that in mind. You want to spot specific behaviors depending upon where you're at and what's happening, so you can control that situation. So interest, you're going to find there's a distance and personal space there. They're going to be a little bit closer together with you. Again, the orientation of their body, their shoulders are going to be parallel to yours. Eye contact is going to be very strong. About 70 to 80% of, their eye contact will be showing at all times. Their arms might be resting around their neck. They're kind of getting a little bit, anxious, not anxious, but, excited is a better term. Maybe a little bit of lip biting in anticipation. If you see that escalating more, again, watch that. And, if you are in a position to say, how are you doing? Are you okay? Or maybe even just pat their arm, whatever you need to do, just to make sure that it's not getting to the point where it could be turning into anxiety. If it is anxiety, presence of 3 or more of the following are going to be present. And again, the more that you see this, the more that it's sort of escalating, the more you want to be able to have yourself in a position to control your client or to control the situation. Because again, anxiety can easily escalate into anger. So if you see a presence of 3 or more of these, take note. Nail biting. Most people will do that. Again, if it's something they normally do, they normally bite their nails, then yes, you can kind of dismiss that. They're going to be fidgeting while they're seated. They're not going to be able to get comfortable. They're going to consistently be moving around. They may be tapping the heel of their foot or their shoe, or just kind of, taking their leg and they're just kind of flapping it back. It's just going a mile a minute. Maybe they have their leg crossed over. Now, again, some people automatically do that. I personally do that when I am thinking or writing or journaling, and my leg, I have it crossed over, and my left crossed over my right, and it's just going a mile a minute. But that is something that I have always done, even when I was little. So it's something that people can dismiss if they were reading my body language. They might be tapping their fingers or hands on their lap. Their fingers are just going back and forth, almost like they're pretend typing. They're fidgeting with their hands. Palm sweating is another thing that you'll be able to see, or just sweating in general. Clearly the anxiety is getting worse. Maybe they're jiggling their pocket contents. They're trying to hide it, so they put their hands in their pockets, and you can still see their hands moving. And if they have items in their pocket, they're going to start jiggling around. They might also start making a little bit of noise, meaning humming. But not a slow hum, like almost like a whistling or under the breath singing. And it might get louder, or it might be not like someone who is just sort of humming around and doing housework. And even maybe some of the differences, you might have someone who maybe your significant other does this around, maybe they're doing laundry and they're humming and they're just very light and faint. But where it could escalate is it does turn into whistling, or like it gets louder and louder and more incoherent, where it's not like a lovely humming tune. It's turning into something that's not pleasant to listen to. So these are just a few things to keep in mind. Again, where could this pop up? Court. mediation, where you're trying to really make sure that this, you're coming to an agreement and it's really getting nasty and you don't want it to go that way. What are some things that you need to look out for? What can you do at that point? Do you need to say, look, let's take a 5-minute break and walk your client outside to get them to calm down more? Do you need to say, let's call it a day? What could be done and what options do you have available to you? But again, the body language is going to be a telltale sign, because a lot of times, sometimes people don't, they're not going to sit there and argue with you. They might be taking it, and then all of a sudden they just explode. But before they explode, they're typically presenting some of these behaviors. So again, just keep these things in mind. There is a difference between interest and anxiety. Another thing where this may come into play is for those people who do have an anxiety disorder. Maybe they have a social anxiety disorder, and maybe being in court makes them much more anxious than it would just sitting in your office. Try to find out if these are things that you can find out from your client that they have, so you can, again, just be aware of it, and if a break needs to be taken, or if you need to, do what you can to kind of help calm their nerves, the more you know, the better. I have a few pictures here just to kind of give you an idea of anxiety, frustration, and interest. So clearly this first photo here, the lady at her computer, she is clearly frustrated. She is rubbing the bridge of her nose. Her thumbs are touching just below her, her cheekbone, closer to her chin. Maybe she has been at her workstation a while, but clearly she has some frustration there. She's tired. She's ready to stop. So the two ladies that are sitting here side by side, talking, as you can see, their body language, they are more shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee. So they're interested in the conversation that they're having with one another. Now here, what's interesting is the lady on the left, and she is touching right about her chin, the lower part of her face. So you have to kind of presume perhaps the lady here in the blue may have said something to her that she didn't really like, or she finds a little bit shocking. Now, she has not pulled away from her so much in the conversation that it's something really bad, but it is something to take note of. So in this scenario, again, if you were the person in the blue and you were talking to this person, this lady who's wearing the black shirt here, and she starts to rub her chin, or she's touching her chin, at that point, that's a good time to interject a question, because even though this is probably a very pleasant conversation that they're having, it can easily turn to anxiety or frustration very quickly, depending upon what's being said. So again, just watching that body language. So even if if I were watching these two people, my next move would be to move down further with her body and say, what's this lady's next step? So if she starts to maybe uncross her legs, or her legs move further away from the other lady's legs, maybe they go straight, looking, directly underneath the table. At that point, she's disengaged from what that person has said to her, and she's kind of ready to end the conversation. So there's always telltale signs in the body, and you want to work your way from the face on down. Signs of possible lying. This can come up in a lot of different scenarios, depending upon, again, what type of law you practice. So 2 or more of these signs indicate the person's lying, they're holding something back, or they maybe have kind of fudged the truth a little bit. Maybe they embellished a little bit. So some things that you're also going to be looking for, again, with this, it's not just about the face, it's about the torso, the arms, their legs, to determine whether or not they are really being truthful. Do you need to do a new line of questioning? Do you need to badger them, per se, into kind of breaking down? So these are just a few of the things to think about. So 2 or more of these signs indicate lying or holding something back. So it could be, again, going back to the face, touching of the nose, chin, covering their mouth, Touching of the ears is another thing. If you see them rubbing their ears, or perhaps maybe they're touching them once or twice, that is something to look at. Another thing to realize with lying, when people are under stress, their ears will typically get a little bit not heated, but an escalated body temperature a little bit. But you have to really be looking for that. And if it's a woman who has longer hair, you can't ask them, hey, can you lift up your hair so I can see your ears? So you won't always really see that. The other part of the body that does that is the nose, and it's not the whole nose, but it's right around the nostrils. The nostril area can turn red ever so slightly when someone is lying or they're embellishing a little bit. So you have to really be looking for that, and it has to be, you have to be up close, pretty up close and personal to see that. But that's why a lot of times with touching the nose, because that escalated body temperature, and it's not to the point where it's going to make them, if you took their temperature, that it would be over 98.5. It's going to be enough where it irritates the membranes around the nostrils and in the ears to where they do get a little bit red and irritated, and that prompts the person to touch them or to rub their nose. So, and again, you have to kind of discount this if they're sneezing and, if they're itchy, watery eyes, it could be allergy related. So again, keep that in mind. You have to really watch for this. But if they seem to be fine and they're doing that, they're touching their nose, touching their ears, that's when you want to try to see what you can see with a little bit of redness. Their eye contact is going to weaken. They're not going to want to look you directly in the eye. Unless they're a professional liar, psychopath, at that point they have this down to a T. But for most people in general, their eye contact is going to weaken. They might start looking away or not hold eye contact with you for as long as they normally would. You will find the palms of their hands are rarely visible because, again, it goes back to that fight or flight mode. If I am wanting to protect myself and I want to, if I am talking to you and we're in front of one another, you want to be able to see the, again, the openness of the body language, which means my palms are facing you. If I feel like I have to defend myself with what I am saying, and you will see people on television do this a lot of times when you see people who are under oath or perhaps maybe they're on a committee and they're trying to explain themselves, you will always find that because they're in that defense mode, that the outer part of their hand is facing you and their palms are facing them because they want to protect themselves. Again, fight or flight mode, the palms are always going to go over your head or cover your body. So anytime that the palms are not visible, or if they're hiding them a lot and the palms of their hands are facing them more than they do you, there's a chance they're lying. Their back is rarely held straight, meaning that their posture is weak. Now, it could be that they're kind of sitting back in the chair more, or maybe their shoulders are slumped over, but their back is rarely held straight because, again, they're defending themselves, so it does tire your body. The shoulders are going to move forward, and shoulders meaning they're moving forward, but their back is not as straight. So it could be that they're, again, fight or flight mode. It's almost like going into a fetal position. Their shoulders are going to, again, I have to protect myself. So they're going to go in forward, meaning moving in. Always make sure you're considering the situation again and consider how well you know the person. If this is something that they normally do, or you have been working with them for a while and you're finding that maybe they're always pulling on their left ear or right ear, that's just something that they normally do. And again, if it's an evaluation, you can always ask others about their characteristics to give you better insight. Does Bob always do, and fill in the blank? So you can always add and ask other people what, that know them a little bit better. Is that something they normally do? Just to see, what they're doing. Here's a couple of examples. For example, with these two people, this gentleman here who is really rubbing the back of he's like almost wringing the back of his neck. Clearly if I asked him a question, and he's doing this, he's not answering me, he's trying to think of the truth. He's trying to think of something to say to me, and probably whatever comes out of his mouth will not be truthful. This gentleman, again, when you're asking someone a question and they cover their mouth, chances are what's going to come out is a lie or embellished truth. So again, just to kind of recap on this, if someone is lying, they're also going to look away several times while they're speaking. That eye contact is going to be broken. They're going to be looking all around because again, they're trying to kind of make this up as they go along. They will not mirror your body language, again, meaning shoulder to shoulder, toe to toe, torso to torso. They're going to be, off at an angle or just kind of diagonal from you. They will not mirror mirror you directly. They're going to cross their arms, cross their legs to block out what you're saying, or while they're talking, again, they go into that defensive mode. Now, while you're speaking, they may brush their hair back, with their fingers. And usually if you see this happen, again, eyes and above, that's interest in what you're saying, or they like what you've said. But usually if they're lying, they're going to be brushing their hair back, maybe, under their ear or away from their ear. Or they're just going to be brushing their hand through, because again, they're trying to figure out how can I respond to this? How can I get out of this? They're going to look side to side. Again, an indication of guilt is always they're going to be looking from side to side because they're trying to figure out if there's other people in the room, what are they thinking? They're going to, again, look to see what their body language is. Raised eyebrows can also indicate the same, kind of the same thing, but with the eyebrows, that's not as often as most people would think. They're not touching them, they're raising them up. They're disagreeing, and again, they're probably going to try to figure out how they can counteract what has been said or what's been asked of them if they've been placed at the scene of a crime, or if they've kind of been caught in a lie, almost like they're just, wow, I'm really surprised, but they're not. They're like, oh, wow, I just got caught. How do I get out of this? And again, watch for fidgeting. That's a huge thing. This is going to show a lot of discomfort. People fidget when they stand, they'll fidget when they're sitting, and unless they have a really good reason for that, like maybe they recently had surgery and they have stitches and maybe they have to move around because they feel more comfortable. But usually these are things that you're probably going to know about, or someone else will also know about as well. So fast moving feet while they're listening can mean that they're intimidated. Not so much that they're lying, but it could mean that they're intimidated. Or maybe that they're excited, nervous, or scared. But again, keep in mind, if this is something that the person already does, you have to eliminate that from interpreting the body language. It can no longer be applied because it's something that they've always done or have been known to do. I have a good friend who, even though we live in Florida, it could be 110 degrees outside. She's always crossing her arms and rubbing her arms because she's cold nature. She's always cold. Again, I don't care how hot it is outside. So that is something she always does. So if I'm evaluating her body language, I have to dismiss that. I can't construe it as something she is taking what I say as negative, or, she doesn't agree with me. It's just something she always does. And then lastly, slowly shifting weight away is going to indicate an uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable, I'm distracted, or I'm bored. And again, it goes back to looking at the situation. So if you start seeing the person, maybe they're seated, maybe they've taken the stand, and you see the weight shifting back as they're being asked questions, and they're not answering right away. But their weight is shifting back. And how you can tell this is you'll see their shoulders or the upper part of their body move back ever so slightly. It might go to the left and then to the right, like they're trying to settle into the chair, but it means they're uncomfortable. not physically uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable with the situation, the setting, what's been asked of them. Now, if this happens when you are in the office, maybe it's a new client and you see them do that, they may just be uncomfortable, meaning nervous, or maybe you have gone off on a tangent. You're talking about them, and maybe you're a business attorney and you're talking about the different types of incorporations that they possibly want to do for their potential business entity, and they just feel this is above my head. Maybe this is boring to me, or I don't like it. Again, if you're at that point, stop, ask them, does this make sense? Bring them back into the conversation, get them involved more. But again, these are just a few of the things you want to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out if that other person is lying or holding something back. I want you to take a moment, even if you need to pause the video. What are some scenarios you have faced where you felt the other person was lying? Start thinking about that. Was it the last time you were in court? Was it at mediation? And then think about the situation and the setting, and what did that person do, with their body? Were there any body language cues there that you could have picked up on now that you're going through this? Maybe touching their face a lot, or maybe they were ringing their ears with their hands a lot, or perhaps maybe they were talking to you, but their palms were facing them. So take a moment and jot that down. Think about, those scenarios, and what body language cues do you remember that could have been a telltale sign for you? And feel free to pause this video to do that. So again, this should give you a pretty good idea as you're thinking back, and it will also help you in future scenarios to kind of determine those things, and you can be ready for them and be able to stop where needed to bring them back in the conversation. And if you can't, to kind of make a mental note about what the person is doing and the situation and setting. Are you trying to determine, are they being caught in a lie? Do I need to investigate, if it was something about where they were? Do you need to look into that further? Do you need to ask a new line of questioning centered around that? The next part of this is hand signals and body posture. So this has to do more with the hands and the arms and the torso of the body. You can tell a lot from a handshake. Now, clearly in this day and age with post-COVID, or still kind of in COVID, but sometimes people don't want to shake hands. And of course, depending upon where they're at, where they're from within the world, sometimes handshaking is not something that people want to do. So if you ever have to extend, you extend your hand to shake their hand and they don't extend theirs, or maybe they kind of pull away or take a step away, just extend your hand back. Don't address it. Just extend your hand back down to your side and just keep talking. It's great to meet you. I hope we can come to a resolution today. And that's simply because of the world that we live in today. They just may not feel comfortable with touching because of germs. So don't read anything into that as far as body language is concerned. Or if they're like, hey, I don't want to shake your hand, but I'll fist bump, which again, that's still touching. I don't know why people will do that in lieu of shaking a hand, but to each his own. But just keep that in mind for right now. So there's a couple of things you can tell from a handshake, and this should help a lot of you who are doing mediation, who maybe have an opposing party that you have to meet with. There's lots of different things that you can tell from a handshake. So keep in mind with your own handshake, is it confident? Is it a little too, do you need to tone it down a little bit? Is your hand being too strong physically? You want to have a good, confident handshake, meaning it's firm, it's not too weak, it's not too strong, just firm, and direct eye contact and smile. Or if it's not appropriate to smile, how do you do, is all that really needs to be said, and making sure that you have direct eye contact. So there's one thing that is called a follow me shake, or even there's something else that was considered submissive handshake, where the palm of their hand is facing the sky, meaning that they're exposing their palm to you. It's almost like for those of you who are pet lovers, if you have a dog, a lot of times your dog, if they consider you the alpha dog, they will roll over and show you their belly, because, mostly because they trust you, but sometimes they will do that because they recognize you as the alpha. So it's the same thing too with people. If the palm is facing the sky, they're going to be a little bit more submissive, easier for you to handle and deal with. Same thing with a follow, with the follow me handshake is a little bit more of it's a domination effect. So you will see this sometimes on television where the palm is facing the floor of that person. It's a desire to dominate. So when they go to shake your hand, they're going to have the palm of theirs is going to be covering your hand, and perhaps maybe the other hand is underneath or above the same arm. If you meet someone and they do that, maybe you're getting ready to go to mediation and you meet the opposing party and they try to pull that, that means that you're in for a bit of a battle. So just know that. But we call that the follow me shake. When you get that, you need to set control immediately to let them know that you are on an even playing field. All you have to do is, while you are shaking their hand, you want to simply turn over their hand while they're shaking to where it's palm to palm, both, your thumb and their thumb are on the upper side of the handshake. That way they understand and they're going to know immediately that you're not going to be bullied. So you can always set control with the handshake, but that's one of the best things that you can tell is this going to be a person who's going to try to dominate the conversation? Am I in for a battle? And then of course you have the low confidence shake, which is meaning they're barely touching. There's no eye contact, no smile, no verbal contact. It's a strong indicator that person has low self-esteem. So it could be a potential client, and it kind of gives you an idea of where you need to go with that. Where, are you going to have to lead more if they're your client? Maybe it's you're a divorce attorney, and this is maybe this is the wife, and she really has felt beaten and battered down mentally and emotionally. You'll get a really good idea from that by how she is shaking your hand. So kind of keep that in mind. Here's a few examples and pictures of some of these handshakes that we have talked about. So this handshake right here is a nice, good handshake. Again, you always want to have the thumbs where they're both up, meaning on top, their thumb and your thumb are, okay? A good firm handshake, they're not hurting each other. They're able to, it's a good confident handshake. This here is the follow me shake, where the person has this person here who has the hand, they have two hands involved in this shake, that person wants to be the dominant person. And as you can see, this person here has already, when they first started shaking hands, more than likely, this person here in the orange or rust colored shirt, more than likely their palm was facing down based on the way this person had their hand. And clearly what they have done is they've just shifted it to the right a little bit to where, again, thumb and thumb are facing up. His thumb and his thumb are facing up, to let them know this is going to be an even playing field. You will not be dominating or bullying me. But this is what's considered the follow me shake. And again, sometimes this arm may not be on top of the person's hand. It may be further up their arm, underneath, or on top. But it's typically the same arm. When you are watching television, you will find a lot of dignitaries who try to pull this with another dignitary or people who are high up in the government. I've seen plenty of presidents, past and current, who do this as well. So again, this is a good example of the follow me handshake and how to even the playing field. This here is a great example of a weak handshake. As you can see, this person, their palm is facing up, and this person here is going to be more of the dominant one. But again, this person could easily even the playing field by just while they're shaking hands, to turn it simply to the left to where both thumbs are on top. So that kind of gives you a good example of what to watch for and what could be happening here in those scenarios. Now, this is clearly a golf photo. Maybe this person's playing golf and this is their caddy, perhaps. And here we don't know exactly what's happening, but again, it could be a position where this person here wanted to dominate. Body posture, again, is very important. I keep talking about this a lot, but this is something that you really want to make sure that you are being aware of. Good posture, it shows you're happy and interested. Bad posture, sliding down in your chair, it's going to give that negative persona, a change in your mood, and perhaps also tell the other party, hey, look, I'm bored with this. Dilated pupils means the person is interested, but again, you have to take into consideration the situation and setting. If there is alcohol involved, you have to kind of dismiss this because alcohol will dilate your pupils. If you are shy by nature and maybe you're an introvert and direct eye contact really bothers you, if you're on the autism spectrum, which there are many people who are, and eye contact again will bother them, you can look at something called the positive area of the eye. Basically what this is the area, it's the triangle between your eyes and your nose. So there's a small triangle that goes from your, the corners of your eyes all the way down to the tip of your nose, where if I'm looking directly at you and I'm not doing direct eye contact, but maybe I'm looking at the bridge of your nose or just above it, like between your eyebrows, it gives the illusion that I'm doing direct eye contact, but I'm actually not. So it makes me feel more comfortable, and it makes the other person feel comfortable too, feeling that I'm good and confident at what I do. So if you are on the spectrum, if you are an introvert, if you're shy by nature, that is another thing that you can do. You always want to make sure if you're not doing direct eye contact that you are looking at that positive area of the eye. So again, that's a triangle between your eyes and your nose. Now, if you want to display authority, let's just say you're delegating, you've been put in charge of project management and the other few people on your team are higher up than you at the company. For whatever reason, you've been put in charge of this project and you really need to kind of project that authority and take charge. You want to, again, I would suggest looking at the positive area of the eye. Maybe looking a little bit more at the forehead. It's going to give that impression that you're leading the situation and make you feel more comfortable. With client interaction, a few things that you are definitely going to want to take note of when you're marketing your firm. And again, this really does pertain more to people who have to go out and get their own clients. Whether you're an independent firm or you work for a large one, but you're responsible for bringing in your own book of business. Keep in mind as a professional, you want to be approachable. I can't stress this enough, especially with attorneys, just like doctors. Clearly you've accomplished a lot. You have the educational background, you're a practicing attorney, you've accomplished a lot, you are able to really help people, you're knowledgeable, and that can be very intimidating for some people. Even as a speaker, sometimes, we want to be approachable. We don't want people to feel like we're one of those speakers that, hey, we have a bodyguard and nobody, you're not supposed to be approaching us before, during, or after the event. We want to be approachable. So keep in mind your body language is going to interpret a lot of that. So whether you're at a networking function, maybe you're hosting a presentation, you want to keep a couple of things in mind. You're talking to them, maybe somebody touched their nose. Again, they really didn't like what they just heard. Maybe they're in your office, you met them at a networking function and they need to hire an attorney and they're doing a consultation with you. Maybe you just talked about, your fee structure, what you charge. So they just touched their nose. Again, great opportunity to stop and say, does that make sense to you? Did that answer your question? Am I being clear so far? How are you feeling so far about what I have told you? So it's a good indicator. You don't want to keep talking about the process because all you'll do is intimidate them further. You want to make sure that you are walking them through. They want to be able to and need to be able to trust you to come on board with you as a client. Maybe they just rubbed their eyebrows or their forehead. They're pushing their eyeglasses back. So far they like what they're hearing. So it could be the benefits of working with you. Here's what we could do, or maybe you were talking about someone that you just helped in vague detail, of course, almost like a success story. Or you're talking about, this is my hourly rate is $500, but I do have you can do a retainer. I have payment plans. So they, clearly money might be an issue for them. So if you see them doing that when you're talking about payment plans, then clearly that's something that they're probably going to need. And you may even want to stop and say, hey, do you feel like you might need a payment plan? Is that something that would be, I can get you some more information on that. Would you like that? And see what they have to say. Now, perhaps someone just folded their arms or they just crossed their legs over. This can be construed as a negative sign. Not so much that they're offended, but they could have been turned off by what you just said. So it could be, hey, I'm going to do the best that I can for you, but I can't guarantee the outcome. And clearly no one can on anything. But if you see them do that, again, you might want to stop and say, I can't guarantee the outcome, but what would you like to see happen? And what are kind of your expectations? Pull them back into the conversation. That's very, very important. Those body language cues are a telltale sign that there's something that they don't like or they're nervous or worried about. So keep that in mind. So when this happens, you're going to either move on to another point or try to be more flexible or offer other options. You need to talk with them a little bit further. And it also does help to change your tone a little bit. Perhaps maybe because you're excited about what you do, maybe the speed of your voice is a little too fast for them. You need to slow it down a little bit, or maybe take it down an octane because it just feels a little bit too much for them. So if someone's tilting their head, just like this lady here, now this is always again, it depends on the situation and the setting. This usually means that they have an interest in what you're saying, or they're absorbing it. So you want to keep going. Usually it means the person's also, if they're seated at the edge of their seat with their shoulders and arms kind of, they're sort of anxiously leaned into you. They really are very interested. Now, with the way this person is sitting right here, this is also kind of a tilting of the head where they're sort of back a little bit in their chair. So it might be, maybe you said something that could be of interest to them, whether that's a positive or negative interest. So again, depending upon how they're tilting their head, she is not smiling. There's nothing about her facial expressions that say that she's happy. So it could be sort of a disbelief. So again, when you're seeing something like this, it's always good to stop and ask them, how are you feeling about this? Does that make sense? Bring them into the conversation. Clasping of the hands behind the back or in front of the body, this usually means that they're, not a novice on the subject, so perhaps maybe it's, again, another attorney you're talking to. You want to stick to the facts and be cautious of what you are saying. Because again, those are usually telltale signs that, hey, I'm on an even playing field. I know what you're saying. And these are also things that you can do to also let the other party know, hey, I kind of know what I'm doing too here. The body orientation, again, is going to be facing you shoulder to shoulder, or it should be, to make sure that's how you really know there's an interest and they're following along. Now, if they're facing halfway, or if they their body just sort of edges away from you a little bit, they're either thinking about something else, they're perhaps in a hurry, or they're losing interest, or don't like what you're saying. Again, touching of the chin while you're talking. This is an evaluation sign, so they're soaking in what you're saying, but they're probably not 100% sold on it. So you're going to probably need to convince them, if I'm talking, and again, client interaction, they're in your office, perhaps maybe you were talking about timelines, about how long this could take, and maybe you say 6 months and you see them touching their chin. You're probably going to need to convince them why this is going to take 6 months. So you might want to elaborate on that a little bit further. But again, bring them back into the conversation. These are always telltale signs of getting them verbally involved. So take just a moment, and even if you need to pause the video, think about, who's had a client interaction, if you've had one that has turned negative, meaning it's a potential client or another attorney you were going to refer business back and forth, and that it just didn't turn out well. They turned into maybe not an argument, but constant disagreement and going back and forth of, I don't like this, or, I like what you said before, but I don't like this. So think about those client interactions that may have turned negative, or, maybe even meetings where after they left, you think, gosh, what just happened? The reason you want to think about that is you want to go back and think, okay, what was said? So kind of jot that down, and then try to remember, were they doing any of these body language cues? Were they touching their chin? Were the hands clasped behind the back, or maybe behind the back of their head? Was there anything that they were doing, rocking in their chair? And if you can remember, what occurred verbally when that happened. So if you want to take a moment, pause the video and think about that. So again, this is going to give you a really good idea of things that may have happened in the past and why they happened and where you can prevent them in the future. Because again, once you get a client into your office, you always want to make sure that everyone's on the same page, everyone's on board, they understand where they're going, what's going to be involved, and so forth. Next, we're going to talk about arms. The arms are also a telltale sign. Usually you can see a person's arms, even if they're sitting behind a desk, or if it's, in the jury box, you should be able to also see their arms and what they're doing with them. A few things to keep in mind, again, for you always want to keep your hands visible. You don't want to preen or groom with your hands, unless you absolutely have to. Try to do that in private. And what can you tell from the appearance of hands? You can actually tell a lot, and again, based upon what they're doing with their arms as well in conjunction. Sweaty palms, what do they really mean? And again, situation and setting is always going to take note of that. But if they're wringing their hands a lot and it seems like their palms are getting really sweaty, you're either getting close to uncovering something or getting them to say something they don't want to say or disclose. So keep that in mind. Another really good thing to look out for too is steepling. It's a great positive sign, a great positive evaluation. And I would definitely say if you are in court and there's a jury or a judge and they're doing this is usually a good sign. It's called steepling. This gentleman here is doing it. It almost looks like praying, where the hands are together, but it's not. It's just the tips of the fingers, and the rest of the hands are open as to let air through. But they call it steepling. So it's a good positive evaluation. They are listening to what you're saying, they're open to it, and they're evaluating it. If someone turns from that to hand wringing, meaning that the thumbs of their palm are rubbing the palms of each of the hands, they're getting nervous, they're not liking this, they might really start to feel uncomfortable with what they've heard. A display of the thumbs, more or less, like if they are, standing and the display of the thumbs are showing, but maybe they're hiding the rest of their fingers, can also be construed as an evaluation sign. And then, of course, there's no hand movement at all. Sometimes people are, usually when you see no hand movement, maybe they're resting one hand on top of the other. Calm, cool, collected, that's also a very, very good sign. Now with the arms, when you do see arm withdrawal, maybe what would be considered arm swinging or arm freeze. These are all things to kind of look out for. No arm movements or very little. Don't bother me. The high confidence arms is another thing to watch out for, and I'm just gonna be reviewing this. I'm going over all of this just briefly first. You have a territorial displays of the arm. You have what's called the Superman stance, which men use more than women. It's more for positive situations that, hey, I can handle this. Women will use the Superman stance to level the playing field in negotiations. There's the dominant poses, and then of course you have a territorial table display. And then the length of positioning of arms. So, that's something else to kind of keep in consideration as well. So when you're looking at the arms, keep in mind you want to observe for signs of discomfort, confidence. They're confident in what they're hearing or confident in what they're saying, depending upon the situation. So when we're typically excited, but excited in a positive manner, or we like what we're hearing, usually most people will not restrict their arm movements. They're usually going to have a tendency to kind of quote unquote defy gravity, maybe raise their arms high above their head or even halfway. When people are truly energized and happy, their arm motions are going to be very active. Now, also too, if they're doing it a little too much, meaning maybe they're under oath and their arms start swinging everywhere, they could be describing a situation, so the anxiety could be kicking in a little bit, but you can usually feel that. When a person's feeling good or confident, their arms are going to typically swing their arms, again, in a positive direction, meaning open, where, again, the palms are going to be facing you. If it's more of an insecure person, where their arms are, they're subconsciously kind of like restraining their arms, meaning they don't want to move their arms at all, or maybe their elbow is locked at their side. They're unable to kind of what we would say defying gravity and raising their hand up. So they could feel very nervous. That's kind of a subconscious thing to look for, is are their elbows stuck at their sides? So you can usually tell a lot from, an arm, what would be considered an arm freeze, again, meaning that from their shoulder to their elbow, it's frozen, it's not moving, or very little. They don't like what they're hearing. They're getting nervous. Maybe they're trying to think of the truth as they're moving along. So usually when people are upset or fear, a little bit more fearful, I would say, and again, depending upon the situation, we usually will withdraw our arms. So meaning if we're like maybe even injured or threatened, again, it goes back to that fight or flight mode. Our arms are typically going to come straight down to our sides, or they're going to cross over our chest to protect, usually, again, people get into a car wreck, they're protecting their vital organs, or they feel like they will. It may not do anything, but that's our instinct as a human being, is to do that. It's a survival tactic, and it helps protect the individual when a real or perceived danger is sensed, or they feel like, oh gosh, I just got caught lying. So keep that in mind. Restrictive arm movements, or, again, arm freeze, that does occur a lot in children too. Those are some other things that you can watch out for, family child custody evaluations. Usually children, that could be a sign or an indicator of some type of abuse, or they don't want you to find out what's going on, or maybe they have been told, hey, someone's coming over today to ask you questions about mommy or daddy. It's been, typically in the past, children are going to restrict their arm movements whenever they're around an abusive parent. And it doesn't have to be physical abuse. It could be mental or emotional. Again, it's just, they just freeze. So they do learn that the more, typically with children, the more that he or she moves, the more than likely they're going to be noticed. So it's almost like they freeze up, like they don't want to be seen, like they're trying to make themselves invisible. So we as adults also do that as well. So again, it's just something to look out for, where it's no arm movements or very little. They're stressed, they don't want to be noticed. So keep those things in mind. Now, the other thing to kind of think about as well is, that don't bother me. It's almost like a high confidence arm, um, movement, or I should say stance or pose. So royalty sometimes uses it too. I have heard people call it a regal stance, and it's basically where you're standing up straight, it's good posture, but your arms are clasped behind your back very comfortably. Most people mistake this because they feel like it's open body language, but honestly, it's almost like you'll see a supervisor do this where they're walking around in that stance and they're in observance mode. They don't want to be bothered. Because they're a supervisor, it's considered more of a high confidence pose. So it's something that they may be doing, walking around and observing other people's work. Now, the Superman stance is, again, typically more positive situations. I can handle this situation. Don't worry about me. And it goes back to if you ever watched Superman, as you can see with the cape flowing in the background, really the shoulders are back, the head is up, they're looking around, they have their hands on the hips, and maybe their thumbs are hidden, but you see the 4 fingers on each side. It's called Superman stance because that's what Superman would do when he's, hey, don't mess with me. Men typically will use this for a more positive situation. Women tend to use this to kind of level the playing field. So if you do see a woman do this, usually not that they always feel intimidated or threatened, but perhaps they're entering into a negotiation and they're doing that. They want it to go well, but they're also wanting to let the other person that, hey, you're not going to be dominating me. I'm, an equal partner in this, and we're going to move forward as well. So a lot of times too, if you do see a Superman stance, but you see the fingers are in the back and the thumb is in moving forward, like you can visibly see it, but the fingers are in the back, the actual back. This is more of an inquisitive position, like what's going on, or there might be some issues we need to talk about. So keep that in mind, depending upon where the thumbs are. If they're in the back, it's not a Superman stance, it's an inquisitive one. If the fingers are in the front, it's a Superman stance. It's more or less, they're trying to figure out what's going on. And sometimes women will do this too to be more of a dominant, hey, almost like a managerial type stance. What's going on here? Why aren't you all working? So keep that in mind. The thumbs will be a telltale sign with that as well. Territorial table displays, you're going to find that this is usually people will, if they're doing this, they're standing up at the table. Now it could be that you're in the middle of a negotiation or mediation and you see someone who does this where they're kind of bent over the table a little bit and their fingers are sprawled out in more of that steepling scenario, but they're down on the table and the arms are spread further apart. Perhaps they're a little bit, like maybe 2 or 3 inches away from the body. That's going to be more of a territorial table display, meaning, okay, enough is enough. We need to wrap this up. This is going to turn negative, or it's going to escalate if we don't wrap things up. So it's usually that person they're signifying their territory. It's a confidence and authority gesture, but you usually will see this sometimes in business meetings, but it can also pop up in mediation as well. Now, the length of the positioning of the arms, the further apart they are when they do this, when the arms go on the table, or the hands go on the table, excuse me, is where they're at with frustration level. So the further apart they are away from the body, the more this is probably going to escalate or turn negative, or the quicker it will turn negative. So keep that in mind. So if you do see someone who does this and you see where the arms are like spread further out, maybe they're at the edge of each sides of the table, they've had enough. So keep that in mind. At that point, you may want to pull back and say, let's take a 5-minute break so we can regroup, or I understand how you're feeling, let's reconvene tomorrow. It may be a good idea to take a break because that person is they've had enough. They're frustrated. So the length of the positioning of the arms are going to be a huge telltale sign with that. So just to, again, to kind of review some of the photos here with arms. For example, this person here who has the arms crossed, they, if you were talking to that person and they do this, they're shut off from what you're saying. They don't like it. They don't agree with it. So these are some things to keep in mind. If you were talking to this person and they start to kind of rub their arms a little bit, that more than likely it's a positive sign. It could even be, if it's a personal setting, more like a flirting sign. So if they are, the fingers are open here, if they were closed, like this person is, then it would be construed as negative. So the more open and less touching that there is, the more interest and desire there is there. Here's a few more photos with the arms as well. Now with this person, the gentleman who's outside with the cap, someone's taking his photo. Clearly, as you can see, it's cold. There looks to be some snow there. So more than likely he's crossing his arms because he's cold. Maybe the jacket he has is not warm enough. There's no sign of frustration. He's smiling. He's kind of leaning. He could even be waiting for someone. So this should not be construed as completely negative because again, it's outside. Now with this young lady here, she has her arms folded over. But they're folded over across one another. They're not folded against the body. So it could be too, this is just something she normally does. Or as you can see, her fingers are not, she's not grabbing at her arm, they're just resting comfortably. So she's in a good position. If this were to, walking into a mediation or a negotiation and you see this pose, again, watch to see if they are grabbing onto the arms, as far not resting like this, but if they're grabbing their arms, there could be a little bit of negativity there. But if they're resting comfortably like this, that's always a good sign as well. Next, we're going to move on to legs and feet. Now, the legs and feet are, actually the feet are really the most telltale sign of body language. As I was talking about earlier in the presentation, a lot of people think, oh, it could be their face. Yeah, face would be number 2, but if you can see their feet, that is the most telltale sign of body language, where you can really evaluate. If you're able to see all of their body, that's perfect. But if their feet and legs are tucked away under a desk that is not open, you're kind of at a disadvantage. So again, legs and feet, they're the most telling in reading body language. So anytime you can see their feet, the better. If you are, again, jury, you're not going to be able to see their feet. You won't be able to see the judge's feet. But sometimes you can tell some other things just by their legs, like what their feet may be doing based on how their body might be moving. So these are just a few things that you can kind of keep in mind here. So clearly chair rocking. The starter position we're going to talk about, establishing control in the conversation. High comfort positions, the need for space, some of the walking styles, because even if if they do get up to walk around, that can also kind of tell you where they're at and what they're thinking. And, are your feet cooperating or not? So those are a few of the things that we're going to talk about today as well. So the reason feet are the most telltale sign is because our emotions manifest through the feet, then through the legs. They always start from the bottom up. Happy feet, high energy. Usually if you see where the person's feet are maybe just kind of resting comfortably, or they're just moving ever so slightly, not to the point where you feel that there's some nervousness there, what they would call kind of like happy feet or dancing feet. That's kind of a high confidence gesture. So if you're dealing with someone who their feet are pretty calm, or maybe they're moving around ever so slightly, but it's in sort of a rhythm mode, high confidence there, okay? So it can signify if they're, again, their feet are going a mile a minute, maybe they're in the, chair rocking, their legs going back and forth. But again, if it's something that that they normally do, you have to dismiss that. But if it's not something they normally do, it can signify impatience. But, again, if it's somebody who's acquainted with you and you know that they normally do that, then you have to dismiss that. Now, when the feet move and the rest of the body doesn't, that is something you also want to kind of make note of. Because again, it could be that anxiety is starting to build up, but they're trying their best to contain it and not let that go through, where their legs start to move or they start to fidget in their chair. So again, happy feet, high confidence, again, that resting comfortably, or if they are moving, if the feet are moving, it's kind of in a rhythm mode, and you can see like maybe it's just sort of gently circling. So feet that don't move at all, maybe they're planted firmly on the floor and nothing is happening. They're not moving it. It's almost like dead weight. More than likely, they're either not happy or they're not liking what they're hearing. They're trying to be really on alert, but usually it means that they're not happy. They're not happy about being there. Now, if you start to see where the feet are 1 foot out, meaning it's like maybe you're seated across from them and their feet are pointed directly at you. And then you start to see where maybe they move back in their chair and then 1 foot kind of goes off to the side. Or maybe their hands are on their knees, and they're rubbing their knees. They're ready to go. They're done. They either are tired and they don't want to talk anymore, or they are not liking what they hear. So when the hands go on the knees, that's something to watch out for, again, if you're able to see it. So keep that in mind. Here's a couple of examples of, different scenarios with the feet and the legs. So clearly here, this is someone who is very relaxed because they have, their body language is more open. Their hand is resting comfortably on the knee and, they're clearly laying back. This is sort of like a relaxed stance. Now with this person here that has their legs crossed, and if I saw that person in person, more than likely I would see their legs or feet start to move or shake jitterily. As you can see, she's having a conversation that's not going pleasant. She's got her hands out to the side like she's trying to explain something. By her facial gestures, she is not happy either. This person up here in the corner is very relaxed. This is what I would consider happy feet. Even though she has one leg crossed over the other, it's crossed over gently. She's leaning back in her chair and her feet are resting comfortably. So those would be considered happy feet. The two people here who are having a conversation, again, they're relaxed even though her leg is crossed. This is probably something she normally does, but her feet are, now her feet are pointed away from the person she's talking to. So this could be a stranger that sat down next to her and just started talking. It's not somebody that she knows where it's going to be feet to feet and, shoulder to shoulder. Or if they were like that and she moved away into this body language position, she might be saying, hey, I'm just trying to sit here and read, relax, or whatever, and I'm happy to talk to you, but I'm getting kind of bored with this conversation. Before we move on to voices, I just want to recap about feet and legs because it is, again, one of the most telltale signs here. So with feet and your legs, we tend to move towards things that we like or that were agreeable to us, whether it's verbal or something that we see. So that can include, people that we're interacting with. And again, sometimes we can see this because we can see the lower part of their body and sometimes we can't. Now, if someone does, they move their feet along with their torso, and your torso is basically, the upper part of your body, it's usually meaning if they're moving their feet to admit you, then it's more welcoming and genuine. Again, you want to be shoulder to shoulder, foot to foot. Now, if we start to turn away, like our feet start to turn away, but our torso is still towards you, we don't like what we hear, or we're starting to lose interest in what you're saying or doing. or perhaps we want to leave. So when a person turns his feet away, if you're able to see those feet, it's normally a sign of disengagement. And this is really important, especially during mediation, if you can watch for the feet. It's a sign of disengagement, a desire, to distance themselves from the conversation and from you. And you'll notice it usually starts with the feet, then the legs start to move away. Then you're no longer shoulder to shoulder because they have moved their torso, the rest of their body. So the shifting foot behavior, when they start shifting away, it doesn't matter if it's to the left or to the right. Anytime it shifts away from you, it's a desire to depart. Now they may want to just get up and leave, or they need to take a break. So again, when you start to see this happen, and if you can't see their feet, you're going to start seeing it because again, it works its way up through the legs, then the torso, and then before you know it, the shoulders are pointed away from you. It's a good time to stop and take a break. So kind of keep that in mind as well with the body language. And again, if you can't see their feet and legs, you are kind of at a disadvantage, but the more you can see, the sooner you can spot that if you see their feet moving, the sooner you can engage them verbally to say, hey, does that make sense? Or what are you thinking about that? So if you are able to have more open chairs, meaning maybe it's a table that it's an open table, you don't have anything blocking off the legs where you can see that, or if it's just open chairs, meaning a round table of chairs, that is even better if anytime you are able to meet with people and do that. That way they can see your body language, you can see theirs as well. But the knees, when they start clasping at their knees, that's going to tell you a lot as well. Intentional movements of the legs that are associated with individuals who just want to, leave the current situation or not be there. You're going to find that, again, they're going to be grasping their legs, grasping their knees on their legs, and their legs might start to move underneath the chair, maybe one or both. That usually means that the person wants to get up and leave. They're done with the conversation. They don't like what they're hearing. So keep that in mind. It is time to end the interaction if you can. At that point, you don't want to continue moving forward because that's where a situation can escalate. And from a professional standpoint, we never want our mediation to turn ugly. We don't want to see people yelling at one another. We don't want to see things happen where it kind of defeats the purpose of having a mediation. Now, again, when someone's excited about something or feels very positive about the circumstances, we do tend to defy gravity, not just with our arms, but also, with our legs as well. We might start opening our legs a little bit, kind of like we're getting anxious. We're sort of seated at the, we might move towards the edge of our seat. Those are all really good things to look out for with the lower part of the body. Now, if they're standing in front of you too, and they're talking, and maybe one toe is pointed upward, as they're talking, that means that person is kind of in a good mood. They're starting to think about, hey, I like what I'm hearing. This is something positive. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. If you can take a 5-minute break, and maybe if they're out there, they're getting water, and you can kind of tell, maybe their arms are crossing or their legs are crossing over. Again, negative signs. So getting up and moving around always helps diffuse the situation as well. So it can tell, their body can still tell you a story. So the more that you can put them in a situation where you're able to see their feet and legs, the better. So you may want to rework if you have an office space that you use for mediation. If you have to have tables, make sure that it's just the table legs. The rest of it's open. Okay, where you can see those, or it could be more of an open setting like what you would see on a talk show. Sofas, a table, or chairs that are open. So typically, again, when people are excited, these are things that you want to look out for, but excited positive, excited negative can be two very different things. One type of behavior that can be very informative to someone is known as it's called the starter's position. So this is kind of where a person's going to move, his or her feet from a resting position to kind of like that starter position where, again, the heel is elevated. They're more excited. They're kind of on the ball of their feet. It's kind of an intention. It tells us, hey, this person's probably getting ready to do something physical or requiring foot movement, but it's not that they're getting ready to dart out the door to run away, but they want to engage you further. Maybe they're going to be walking towards you, or they're thinking more about what you have said. They're observing, letting it absorb more into their thinking mode. So that can be a really good thing too. Now, what's also called like a leg splay, something that you can kind of spot early, or if you can spot it early, it's good. It's sort of like a territorial display. So perhaps maybe they're standing and they've got, when their feet shift from being, they're flat-footed, standing up to a starter position, but maybe they're kind of upset. They're sort of, but it's the heel, not the heel, but the toe. So in each case, you're going to kind of see where they've exhibited some type of behavior, that they're trying to reestablish control of the situation, or maybe their territory, but their feet are planted firmly on the ground, but they're also kind of, the toes are planted more firmly and the heel is pointed up. So if they find that they're in more of a confrontational situation, their feet and legs will splay out. It gives them a little bit more balance on their part, but it's kind of to reclaim territory, and not so much physical territory, but the territory of the conversation. They're trying to send a strong message to, be careful. Maybe you hit a sore spot. Maybe you said something there could potentially be, it's going to cause a problem. There's going to be trouble. There's going to be yelling. Usually when you see two people who are facing off in a disagreement, you're going to see, I should say you'll usually never see them with their legs crossed, because it's going to make them off balance at this point. They're past that. They've crossed their legs. Now they have uncrossed them and they're at a stance. Maybe they're standing up, but their feet are planted firmly on the ground, but their toes are going to be more prominently displayed. So if you are observing a person's foot going from being together to being kind of spread apart, that is more of a balancing thing. And again, not that they're going to get physical, but they're probably either going to start yelling, or they're going to, I thought we were going to do this, this, and this. So it's more of a dominant stance because they're wanting to communicate, I'm not happy and here's why. So tempers can flare at this point, so you don't want it to go this far. So that's why, going back to what I've said before, anytime you can set up your mediation or set up the room that you're going into to talk to this other person, or to interrogate, or to interview, whatever you're going to be doing, make sure the more you can see of their lower body, the better, because it's that nonverbal behavior that you really want to be on alert with. So those are just a few of the things you can keep in mind when you are evaluating lower body language, meaning the legs and the feet. Now we're going to move on to voices, because your voice is also part of your body language. And if you're talking to someone over the phone, you can't see them. You can only go by their voice. So voice fluctuation and body language signals, again, if you're in front of them, it can go hand in hand. And if not, you just have to go by their voice, by the tone and the pitch. So the tone is going to reflect the attitude in the voice. Their emotions shines through their voice. You can always tell when someone is being sarcastic, clearly, and you can also tell when they're excited and they're happy, because it's going to be reflected in the tone. Or when they're just really bored and they just want to go home, it's going to sound a lot more monotone like this. Now, the volume of your voice is also a telltale sign. A lot of people think, oh, if somebody is talking really, really loudly, that it means that they're angry. It's not. It could just mean that they're excited, but it's a positive excitement. and the speed of their speech. Too fast, it's going to reflect some nervousness that you're trying to get through what you're talking about or what you're doing as quickly as possible. And you want to kind of shy away from that as much as you can. And too slow, it could reflect lack of interest, or you're tired, you don't want to be there anymore. So you want to keep a good speed to your speech as well. Again, if you're in person, hands on mouth while they're talking, hands on mouth over, or hands over mouth while you're talking, it usually means a desire. Or if you're talking and they have the hand over the mouth, they either don't like what they're being told or they want to comment on it because they don't agree with it. So there might be some more convincing there. If you're talking and your hand is over your mouth or somewhere on your face, indication of lying or not being 100% truthful with what you're saying. Hands on the waist, it could mean you've asked too much. You've overstepped a bound. But again, you're not going to be able to see that unless you're in person. So the person's probably getting aggravated. The person feels the situation could be beyond their control. And again, they may go into that dominant stance, which you don't want them to do, like we had talked about previously. And just to recap on voices too, if you are just on the phone with someone and you have nothing else to go by, their tone, and again, you have to really kind of gauge it, because if it's someone that you have never talked with before and maybe they are constantly sarcastic, it's just part of their personality, that's going to pop up a lot through the conversation. You're going to kind of see that. And a good way that you can kind of take control of that, or to sort of just find out what they're really thinking, is to laugh. So for example, if they're being sarcastic about something, just do a quick chuckle and, oh, that's very clever, and move on. Now, if they keep doing it again, sometimes that takes people off guard. If they are consistently sarcastic, it's just part of their personality, to where they may not do it as much, or they may take a different stance with the conversation. Another thing that you can do, is just to kind of take control of that, is to, listen as much as you can. That's almost like evaluating their body language, but you're just evaluating their tone and their pitch. And always make sure that, when they're done talking, acknowledge what they have just said. So they know, hey, I heard you. I've been, taking notes. That's why I've been so quiet. Is there anything else that you might want to add? At that point, trying to draw things out of them while they're on the phone and talking with them, you can kind of gauge, because if you ask someone, is there anything else you want to add? If they're saying things to you like, no, I just really want this to be over, I just don't really have anything else to add, then clearly they have a high level of frustration with the situation, whatever that may be. So just a few things to keep in mind with voice fluctuation and how that plays into body language. The next part that we're going to talk about is autism and body language. Clearly there are a lot of adults that are considered high functioning on the spectrum, and you have to look at their body language differently. Now, clearly, if you don't know if they're autistic, you have no idea of knowing. There are some things that could tell you that is a possibility. But if there's a way that you can ask and be diplomatic about it, or a lot of times, most people will share that with you. For example, I have a social anxiety disorder. If I go to someone's birthday party or if I get invited to a personal event, I do disclose that, because my behavior is going to be very different than what it is if you saw me on stage or if you met me at a business function. So I do share that openly. And a lot of times people on the spectrum are also going to share that with you as well. So body language, it has a different perception when autism comes into play. Now, those with autism, they're unable to read our body language. They're unable to really interpret a lot of the movement. So don't come with the expectations about how they should act. So to give an example of what I talk about here is that if you assume, for example, if you're talking with someone, maybe it's a potential client and the lack of eye contact is there. Maybe they're looking at the floor. Every time you look at them, they look away. You're thinking, oh, wow, this person, they're not paying attention to me, or they're not interested, or what am I saying? So you kind of do the same thing. You ask them, does this make sense to you? But if they're like, yeah, it does, and they're looking at the floor when they're telling you that, you know, this may be someone who is on the spectrum. You may think that an autistic person is ignoring you when actually they are paying closer attention, because they need to look away. They can't, the eye contact for an autism person, a person who is on the spectrum, 9 times out of 10, the eye contact they can't handle it. They literally physically cannot handle it. So they're going to look away. In order for them to absorb what you're saying to them, they have to look away. They have to look at the floor. They have to focus on another object. You want to look for context, because body language is going to be complicated with a person on the spectrum. And believe it or not, there are tons of people who are on the spectrum who are professionals like you and I, who they, again, you're not going to always be able to tell. A lot of people think that they're going to be able to tell, oh, that person's autistic. You can't always tell. There's several that, again, they're just like you and I. And if they tell you, hey, I'm on the spectrum, you might be pretty surprised to hear that. So because body language in general, it's complicated. And for autistic people, they're diverse. There's no easy list or flow chart of, hey, this person's looking away, they're probably lying or hiding something. No, they just need to be able to process what you're saying. So you have to kind of look for the contextual clues, their environment, what's being said. If they disclose it to you, facial expressions, and you got to use your own judgment with this. But another kind of telltale sign is you will see a little bit more face tweaking. Maybe they scrunch up their nose, or their forehead crinkles up a lot, or you're finding that they are sucking in their cheeks a little bit more. You're going to find that there's going to be facial expressions that you wouldn't see in normal everyday life. That could be a telltale sign as well that you're dealing with someone on the spectrum. So again, autistic people are diverse. There's no easy list or flow chart. So a lot of things that we've talked about in body language with a person who is not on the spectrum would be considered, and I don't like to use this term, but normal, aren't always going to apply. So, and again, recognize looking elsewhere. It's often a part of the autistic listing body language. The eye contact is going to be very distracting for them. If they look you in the eye, they're not going to be able to comprehend what you're saying. And it's also okay to not understand. It's okay to tell, if you're getting a lot of really weird, which you would consider weird or offbeat cues of things that they're doing, like looking away, another thing too is walking around in circles, or maybe if they're seated and maybe they're taking their finger and they're kind of going around and around in a circle with their finger. It's okay to say, look, I'm kind of getting some mixed signals here. I'm not really understanding. Are you not understanding me? Is there something else that I need to do? Or perhaps if someone just comes out and says, hey, listen, I just need you to know I'm on the autism spectrum, or we're getting ready to go to mediation and my client is on the spectrum. Okay, thank you for letting me know. What do I need to do to communicate more effectively with you or with your client? It's all you have to say. And usually they're going to come out and tell you, well, if they look away, don't read any, they're just comprehending what you're saying. Or they might have something specific that they do. Again, even autistic people have certain tics and social things that they do or don't do that are just, specific to that person, not to, again, there's no easy flow chart here. So with autism, it raises the level of complication when you are reading and interpreting body language. So keep that in mind. I do want to talk about posing and what your headshot says about you. For all of you who need to have a new photo shoot or a new headshot done, and I do recommend people have their headshots done at least once a year, your posing technique and what your headshot can say about you and about your practice and what you're going to be like to deal with. So you want to keep a couple of different things in mind. What message do you want to convey to the public? Obviously, number one, you want to be approachable. Nothing's worse than feeling like, gosh, I really want to have this person as my attorney, but you feel like maybe a little bit intimidated by that person. You know, clearly you want to come across as educated but approachable. You want people to notice you, but in a good way. Your pose needs to be strong, confident, and approachable. What should you be doing with your hands when you have a headshot done? And should you even include your hands? And should you smile or not smile? So we're going to kind of review a couple of these pictures here. So here on the first one, we have this young lady. This is a nice headshot. You know, maybe she could use this in her marketing material. It's not my favorite, but she is smiling. No teeth are showing. Clearly, she's confident. She is professional. She's probably very highly educated. I do not like what she has included her hands here. I always say if you're going to include your hands, have them down to your side, resting comfortably. They could be maybe one hand on your hip, and the other one down at your side. Maybe that Superman stance, you may want to go forward with that. But looking at this photo, there may be some people who look at it who think, oh, this is a nice photo, but might be a little bit intimidated to approach this person, or may not feel completely comfortable talking with them one-on-one. So for me, this is probably not, if this were my client, I would say, let's not use this headshot. The person here on the right, this gentleman, clearly both of these have good use of color, solid colors with their headshot as far as clothing colors are concerned, and good, nice color. This is a nice navy and white color for her skin tone, and like this gentleman picked out a really good two different monochromatic colors of purple to utilize in the headshot. So this is a good color for him because you're noticing his face. You're not wanting to go directly to just look directly at his tie or at his jacket. So it's a nice headshot. He is smiling. Clearly, you can tell from the way very sharply dressed, educated. He is definitely approachable. Out of those two people, who would you feel more confident and comfortable with? Meaning, hey, this person's educated and they're approachable. So think about that. Those are the things that you want to make sure that when people look at your headshot, this is what they see. But your pose, definitely your shoulders need to be back, just like she has. Again, I think if she would have redone this headshot where maybe cropping this out and maybe having one shoulder a little bit more forward, kind of like what this guy has, which is sort of cut off here in the photo, it would have been a much better headshot. Do you want to smile, not smile? I think smiling, if you feel uncomfortable, it's not something you normally do, smile, but don't show teeth. But the more approachable you are, show teeth, just like this gentleman did. He's smiling so you can see his teeth. That's so important. You want to be approachable. You want new clients to be able to approach you. You don't want to go overboard with it, but this is a really nice, good headshot. And I believe your hand should always really be down at your side. If you feel like you want to do the Superman stance, have the shoulders back and have both hands on your hips, do that, but just make sure that if you are smiling, that you are showing your teeth. Again, you don't want to be too intimidating when you have your headshot done. We're going to do a quick body language review here. So positive signs that can indicate a person's interest can include, but not limited to, parted lips, open stance with arms at the side, meaning open body language, open torso, open hands, palms are facing you, upright posture, sitting up straight, facing, maybe even leaning into you a little bit more if you were seated, mirroring or echoing your body language, frequent touches, in a personal situation, not business related, but personal, the more they're touching you. Women do this, the more interested they are in you. Negative signs that indicate a discomfort can include, but not limited to, avoiding or darting gaze. They're looking away all the time. Maybe their mouth is open at all times, and you kind of see that clenched teeth. Maybe their lips are parted, but you can see where they're clenching their teeth because they're getting frustrated. A closed stance, their arms are folded, legs are folded over, they're scrunching forward, they're going back into that fight or flight mode. Perhaps they're fidgeting in their hands are fidgeting, or they're fidgeting in their chair. Frequent yawns is another one, but it doesn't come up that often. Like they would really be like they're trying to disengage from the conversation and appear to be bored with it. Clearing of the throat, but it's a consistent, they're constantly doing it before or after they talk. Listen for positive and negative tones in the voice. Positive would be matched volume, matched to you. Matched rate of speech, meaning the speed of how they're talking. Shared laughter. Negative would include they're louder, maybe getting a bit more sarcastic. The speed is going too fast, maybe a bit shaky, choppy patterns in their speech as well. Again, these are things that you can listen for when you're on the telephone and you can't see them in person. Again, be aware of the situation and the setting. That's going to be your number one thing that you need to do. That person, are they personally known to you? And don't over-examine the body language. So some items could mean something different depending upon who they are and what they're doing. Become observant of body language. I get asked a lot, how can I learn more about this? Well, definitely read up on it. I've been studying body language since 2004, 2003. I started doing it when I was in the recruiting industry, and it gave me some really good telltale signs about who I should hire and who I shouldn't. You can go to the airport if you're traveling a lot. There's a lot of different emotions and things going on at the airport. For example, people traveling for business, personal reasons, coming and going, greeting family, leaving family. So you see a wide variety of emotions at the airport. If locally, go to a coffee shop, go to Starbucks and grab a cup of coffee, sit outside and watch people coming and going. Just watch them, observe their gestures and what they're doing. Now, if you cannot get out due to COVID or you're kind of confined to your home right now, another good thing you can do is turn on the television and turn it on, maybe turn on the news or turn on, maybe C-SPAN or something, but then mute the volume. Watch the body language and try to figure out what they're doing based on gestures alone, then turn on the volume. That's going to give you a pretty good indicator of what's going on and how well are you reading. Body language it's a lifelong study, and of course there are tons of books out there as well that are really, really good. Your personal space is going to be different for everyone. The closer someone stands to you, the higher their opinion is of you. The further away, the less they care. But everybody has different personal space. If you feel like you're violating their personal space, one way to know is take a step towards them. If they take a step back, or perhaps their shoulders, their upper torso goes back, then you know you're violating their personal space, and all you have to do is take one step back away from them. You don't even have to say anything. Tilted head, it's usually a sign of interest. Again, their facial features are going to be a better telltale sign of that, along with the tilted head. Overly tilted can project a sign of sympathy. You'll see people who will do that when they're expressing their condolences at the loss of a loved one. Lower head or a lowered head can indicate a reason to hide something, again, because they're cowering a little bit, but it's really going to depend on the situation. Getting a compliment, if you're shy, people tend to look away from that. But usually if somebody's shy and their head gets lowered down a little bit, you're going to see their face turn slightly red as well. It's easy to spot a confident person. They're going to have good posture, prolonged eye contact, and they're going to be doing maybe that Superman stance or, walking around with those good confident hands clasped behind the back, high confidence walks and so forth. Excessive laughing. Which I don't think we had reviewed before, but excessive laughing can be viewed as dishonest. Now, unless the person is just naturally jovial and fun-loving, sometimes people laugh when they're nervous, but excessive laughing can mean one of two things: either that they're dishonest, they're lying, or perhaps they have that disorder where they do excessive laughing, and there is actually a disorder for that. But again, usually something like that is going to be disclosed early on. Watch their face. Facial features are, it's one of the first indicators of a change in emotion. Next, again, right after the feet. Emotions travel from the feet up, so you're going to see it in the feet first, and then secondly in the face. So a couple of things that I want to reference for everyone if you are wanting suggested reading and resources. And here we have the reference number for the class, so you can jot that down so you can make sure that you are getting your credit. Again, you're going to get 1 professional, 2 general credits for this class today, or I should say for this webinar today. So you can jot that down and make sure that you file for that to get credit. This credit is available for you, so just make sure that you do file that with this particular number. The suggested reading and resources here that I have listed, if you are looking for a really good body language book, I personally do not have one out there yet on body language. I am working on that, but the one that I recommend for everyone that's easy to read, has a lot of illustrations, it's called What Everybody is Saying by Joe Navarro. Now, he is a former FBI agent who used to do a lot of interrogation, so that is really where he decided to write this book, and it's an excellent book. So you can buy it on Amazon, you can buy it at the bookstore, but it's a great book. And actually, if you click on this link, I think it'll take you directly to Amazon. Yeah, it does. Okay, great. So the next thing I would tell you is if you really want to start studying this and you really want to learn more about it, because again, it takes time. You're not going to be a body language expert overnight. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm still constantly going out there and learning more and more, because as we evolve as a society, our body language and how we interpret things will evolve as well. But there's a YouTube channel out there, and there's a couple of gentlemen who have this channel, and they're constantly uploading new content, but it's called the Behavior Panel, and it's on YouTube. And the gentlemen who run it, they're all body language experts. Some of them are, also former CIA, FBI type people, and then others are, they all have varied backgrounds. But what they do, and again, you can click on the link to check it out, but what they do is they will evaluate behavior in famous cases. For example, they have one on Patsy Ramsey, the mother of Joan Benet. They have several others that they have done on, again, high profile cases, criminal cases, and just, things that have happened in the news as well. So usually a lot of their episodes are about 30 minutes, sometimes up to an hour and 20 minutes, but a lot of really good content on there. And you may find different things and different inputs, because again, a lot of these are based on previous cases. So if you are a trial attorney, there might be a lot of different things that you can learn from that. So that is free. You can access that on YouTube as well. So I do hope what I shared today builds on your body language, the basics that you may have already known, and can help you within your practice, whether that's with jury selection, client interactions, or mediation. But I do hope what I shared today helps you and resonates with you. And this concludes our presentation.